Hello my dear friends, how's it going? Welcome. I'm Mari Thurger and today I'm here to talk about Angrboda, a very interesting entity we find in Norse mythology. Although I'm afraid there isn't much to say about her, there isn't a lot of knowledge concerning this figure. However, we have to read between the lines, so to speak, and try to make some sense over the scattered pieces of information that have survived till our days. So, I'm not going to waste much of your time with an introduction, and let us go straight to the point, if you please, and I hope you enjoy it. Angrboda is perhaps best known as a feminine figure with whom Loki has had 3 children: the world serpent or the Midgard serpent Jormungandr, the great wolf Fenrir, and the goddess Hel. She's often known as the mother of monsters. Unfortunately, the name Angrboda is only found once in poetry in Hinduljord, stanza 40, which is part of the Voluspa in Skama, the short Voluspa, right? And there are many translations of this work, obviously. I, for one, no longer feel inclined to study through Harry Adams Ballow's translations, for reasons here explained on previous video and commentary as well. For this case, the best one so far, in terms of translation of course, and most comprehensive of the material we have at hand is John Lindell's translation for this particular case, obviously, which I will put here on the screen. And from this stanza alone, obviously it speaks more about Loki and both his children and kin being Angrboda, the name given to the mother of the wolf. A little bit more information is given to her through Snorre Sturluson, where he tells us that Angrboda is a giantess from Jotunheimr, a land of giants, and the mother of 3 monsters: Fenrir, Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, and Hel. This was Snorre's interpretation. Several researchers seem to agree that the name Angrboda is probably a late invention dating from the 12th century, meaning we do get a name for the figure with whom Loki had a wolf with, which Snorre later on, much later in the 12th century, will pick the same name to add that she was a giantess and she also gave Loki 2 other children, the Midgard serpent and Hel. But this name is given quite late, right? And despite the late name, the figure in question may be of an older oral tradition, meaning we only get the name for this figure much later in Icelandic literature, but the conception of a feminine figure giving birth to a great wolf may be earlier, from an early period. Given the stanza here shown before, the witch in question could already be a reference to the goddess Hel, or witch as a reference to Angrboda herself. As no doubt, being the mother of a wolf, there are indeed connotations here to acts of sorcery that would later on be equated with the medieval figure of the witch, as we shall see further ahead. Furthermore, within the Voluspa, there's an interesting piece of information that may already indicate a connection with this feminine figure, mother of a wolf, although the name is not given. Again, Angrboda, as I said before, the name itself, only the name, seems to be a late construction, but the concept itself from an earlier period. Now, the source in question speaks of a giantess from Ironwood, mother of the Fenrir wolf, and by consequence this produces the kin of the wolf that shall devour the sun and the moon, relating to the myth of the wolves that shall devour the sun and the moon. Therefore, Angrboda is the mother of wolves. Now, another source, unfortunately not often talked about, especially concerning Angrboda, this figure, is Baldr's Dramar, right? Picking the last stanzas, Balder can only be brought back to life if all things, all persons weep for him. In Snorre's version and interpretation, much later, an old woman named Tok refuses to weep for Balder, thus Balder is not brought back to life. According to Snorre, this old woman is Loki in disguise. However, in Baldr's Dramar, the poem, this figure that refuses to weep is a seeress whom Odin accuses of hostility towards Balder. he accuses the Volva, the seeress, the prophetess, the soothsayer, of being the mother of 3 giants precisely. And she replies to him that none shall see her again until Loki bursts free from his bonds. Snorre interpreted this as Loki in disguise, making the name Angrboda yet another name for Loki in female form. However, the giants here are the serpent, the wolf, and Hel. In this poem, it is more likely that this female figure would be Angrboda, obviously, not only because of the association with the 3 figures, right? The 3 figures, not 3, as being the mother of the great serpent, the wolf, and Hel, and not just because she's Loki's mate, so she would refuse to do something and try to bargain with Odin to release her mate, Loki, right? But because we have a seeress in here, a Volva, a prophetess who is linked to the great serpent and the wolf. And this is where the clues of Angrboda's conception and meaning start to come together. Meaning, this is how we understand or try to understand what Angrboda stands for and what she represents or may represent. So I shall briefly take on the conception of the gandr, which is key in here, and here spoken before in other videos, including on the video about helping spirits in Seder, which you should definitely watch, please. So I'll try to be brief as to not repeat myself, and yet bring about useful information for a better understanding of Angrboda. Gandr sometimes forms a distinct category of magical performance, which has origins much earlier than the Viking Age. In fact, we are face to face with a conception we often see in circumpolar traditions related to shamanism. There are some parallels in Siberian shamanism, but the great influence on Scandinavian cultures of the Iron Age seem to come from Sami origins, where we find the equivalent called gandus, which I shall explain further ahead. The basic sense of the word gandr, and in most contexts, it means magic. Just magic in general, be that the act, the performance of magic, or the power itself as a force existing in the universe, as one of the primal forces from which the worlds were formed. Gandr is something that is often associated with prophecy, as both the magical act but also a sort of spirit entity which is unleashed or sent forth in order for the seeress, the Volva, the prophetess, to be able to foresee, to prophesy. Now, another interesting aspect from the sources is that gandr is both used as a spirit entity but also the utensil, the staff or wand that seems to have been used to summon the gandr. Gandr is intimately tied to Seder, right? As a magical performance mostly related to the act of prophecy or to act in a way that changes the circumstances of life by the interaction with spirit entities with a semi-shamanic character to it. The Volva is the staff bearer, and a gandr is often a reference to this same staff for ritual use as an instrument of sorcery, either for general purposes or as a part of shape-shifting rituals. Of course, the term gandr has had many meanings throughout the centuries, and it is used in several contexts with different definitions, but it's always related to something that conveys a magical performance, be that the utensils used, the action itself, or the helping spirits that aid in the performance. That much is clear. The instrument is sometimes called gondul, from which the gandr, gandir, plural, were sent out, meaning from which either the spell or magic or the helping spirits were sent forth. Spirits summoned by the use of a staff. Some of these spirits take on animal form, and the most recurring animals are serpents and wolves. Usually, the gandr, as a magical projectile, mind emissary or animal spirits, is in the form of a serpent, much like the staff itself, an elongated form that is sent out, which obviously gets a lot of sexual connotations in the sources. Another aspect of a gandr in animal form are wolves, which are often mentioned as the mounts of the performer of Seder. riding on a wolf as an animal spirit. And this bears close parallels with the magical projectile gandus in Sami shamanism. I don't want to elaborate much more on this because, well, as I said before in the previously mentioned video about helping spirits in Seidr, I have developed about this subject in more depth, especially concerning the gandr. So please do watch that video. Now, the point here is that the gandr, which is the plural form of gandr, were the spirits in animal form that were sent or summoned through the aid of a gondul, a staff or wand, a specific instrument. The performer of sorcery sends out the gandr to obtain information or to cause injury, send it on an errand, just like the Sami gandus, right? These gandr in the sources mostly come in the form of wolves, but also serpents. This is also one of the reasons why I don't like very much Bellows' translations, as the Midgard serpent, Jormungandr, is often translated as giant monster, when in fact we have the term gandr in its name, either meaning magic or the spirit animal in the form of a serpent, as we see in contexts of Seidr magic. Jormungandr, the term gandr in it suggests a spiritual entity, so it would actually be in relation to a magical entity, a spirit entity, and the better translation would be huge or mighty gandr, mighty spirit. This goes in line with the presentations of gandr as one of the primal forces of creation, which by itself, under the general meaning of magic, it is a force of creation. Therefore, Jormungandr is the representation of one of the primal forces of creation, which is why it is often in contexts of surrounding the earth itself, protecting the earth somehow, as a spirit entity or primal force that represents the vital force of the earth itself. The fact that it is a serpent not only fits into the descriptions that the gandr are spirits in the form of animals, usually wolves or serpents, but the form of a serpent also fits into the form of a staff or wand, which was the tool of the volur, or of the prophetesses and the seidkunur, the women practitioners of Seidr. And the tool to summon and send forth the gandr is also called gandr, the singular form of gandr, but also gondul. Both gandr and gondul in many contexts are in reference to a staff. Now, Jormungandr, being the mighty helping spirit of the volur, or of the prophetesses, and also Fenrir, the great wolf, as we take it from the sources that the gandr could also take the form of wolves, spirit wolves, the volur or the seidkunur actually rode in their own ethereal forms, let's say. There are a number of kennings that indicate this relation of the gandr with the animal forms of wolves, such as Hallargandr, Hull wolf, Siljogandr, willow wolf, etc., and so on and so forth. The connections between wolves and sorcery in the role as the mounts of the female riders is quite clear in the sources. In several contexts, not only the gandr as animal spirits appear as serpents, but in several instances appear as wolf spirits. There are two brilliant archaeological examples: a wolf rider depicted on stone from Viking Age Denmark, which shows a humanoid figure astride what appears to be a wolf, using serpents for reins, and another serpent is held in the figure's free hand. It's not possible to determine the gender of this figure, as both the clothes and the bodily details are androgynous, which isn't surprising given the whole gender issues concerning sorcery and Seidr and other magical acts in Iron Age and early medieval Scandinavia, which are subjects I have talked about on other videos, right, in this channel. Be that as it may, this figure shows parallels with the figure depicted in the myths called Hirokin, as a giantess who rides on a wolf and used serpents for reins, appearing at Baldur's funeral. It's curious, this figure related to Baldur's funeral, right, which is no doubt the figure of a sorceress, a vulva. And further ahead in the story of Baldur's death, there's that one other feminine figure mentioned previously who refuses to weep for Baldur, and is also associated with the wolf and the serpent. So here we see both visual and descriptive details of the concept of the gandr, as an animal spirit in serpent and wolf forms, which the sorceress sends out or uses. Another visual archaeological example is the picture stone from Smies, Gotland, in Sweden, dated before the Viking Age, around 400 or 600 of the Common Era, so Gotland's Iron Age, with a motif of three animals intertwined in a triskel with a seated female figure beneath. She appears to be naked, sitting with legs spread and wide apart and with arms crooked, holding two snakes or dragons in her hands. This shows sexual and erotic themes in magical performance, as often associated with the shape of the sorceress staff or wand with which animal spirits are summoned and sent forth. But all of this to tell you that this is the same pattern we see in the figure of Angrboda, as the conception of the sorceress, the prophetess, the vulva, the staff bearer, as quite possibly the original figure of, or the main represented description in oral tradition as the mother of sorcery, of magic. She is the mother of wolves, and she is the mother of the mighty gandr. In other words, the mother of Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent. Angrboda is both the mother of one of the primal forces of creation, that is, of magic, as well as the mother of the vital force of the earth, Jormungandr, but also the mother of wolves, which, just like serpents, are often the animal spirit shapes found in the sources concerning sorcery. Angrboda is perhaps the closest we have to the conception of the magical woman, which later on will be interpreted as the witch. In this sense, Angrboda, as the one who gives birth to magic itself, gives birth to one of the primal forces of creation, and as the mother of the mounts witches use to ride and go about their business, she is the closest we have to the pre-Christian Nordic conception of the original witch, or in other words, the mother of witches, or the goddess of witches. Hence, as spoken previously, the mother of Hel, the witch of the underworld, whose power is to rule over the afterlife and over the dead. The connection between the figure of the magical woman or witch goddess as the guardian of the ancestors. Angrboda is the mother of all these conceptions about sorcery and witchcraft, about magic in general. She is the creator of magic. Now, one of the most fascinating aspects of this is that we only have her name mentioned in one single poem, and without counting on what Snorre Sturluson described and described later on and invented his interpretation, right? And aside from that poem itself, there are only two other poems in which she may be briefly mentioned based on the descriptions. So in the literary sources, we don't have much to go about unless we compare it with archaeological sources and other pieces of literature that talk about the gandr. However, for a figure that has been rarely, very, very rarely mentioned, she seems to be in the center of a huge plot that would end up overthrowing the world of the gods themselves. That being the end of all things that start to unfold after the death of Baldur. And it is fascinating, this possible figure who is in the origins of magic itself, having so much control over practically everything, because from her comes forth primal forces that change absolutely everything concerning the gods and the world of the gods and the world itself, and then the plans of the divine, and also through the figure of the trickster spirit Loki. So she is a character in the shadows who moves the most important pieces. And in this case, even Loki, perhaps for the first time, ends up being a tool for this witch figure as well. So, my dear friends, I do hope this video was useful somehow, and I hope you have enjoyed it, of course. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video. And as always, tack för idag. Thanks for today. Obrigado por hoje. Until we meet again, my dear friends.